What's up, guys? Welcome to Whiskey. My name is Jeff. This is a channel where I offer my thoughts and opinions on specific whiskey, and every once in a while throw in other whiskey-related content. Today, I want to do something a little bit different. I want to go over some of the things I like to drink when I'm not drinking whiskey. Stick around. Okay, so today we're going over things that I like to drink when I'm not drinking whiskey. And I should say up front that I like whiskey more than anything else. Like most of what I consume, if I'm consuming alcohol at all, is going to be whiskey. Alternatives, as they're called, are very much on the periphery. I'd say probably like 90% of what I drink is single malt whiskey. And us whiskey nerds, usually when we're exploring outside of the world of whiskey, we'll turn to other sort of brown aged spirits. We'll look for rum or brandy, maybe an aged mezcal or tequila. All of these are categories that I've dabbled in, but I wouldn't say I'm very experienced. So when I go through these, I'll be talking from the perspective of someone who's rather inexperienced or an amateur, or just someone from the outside looking in. Now for this video, I don't only want to talk about brown aged spirits. So yes, we will touch on stuff like brandy and rum, but I also want to cover stuff like gin, cocktails, maybe even beer. Beer is probably what I'm most familiar with when I'm drinking alcohol, if it's not going to be whiskey. I've had plenty of beer in my life. I'm sure a lot of you have too. And even then, it's not like something that I'm really deeply into. Usually the beer I go for is relatively affordable and accessible, so don't expect too much here. So don't look at it like this guy's tried everything and his picks must be amazing. Look at it like this guy's tried plenty of whiskey and knows pretty much nothing about these other categories, but these are his budget go-tos. Anyway, that was basically a 2-minute disclaimer of me telling you the same thing I'm always telling my girlfriend, which is keep your expectations very low. I don't know a lot about these drinks, I just like them. As usual, I do have a mystery pour in my glass over here. It is a malternative, it is awful, it tastes like shit, and I am not looking forward to drinking it. Stick around till after the video and I'll let you know what that is. And I suppose that's it. Let's jump into our list. These are the things I drink when I'm not drinking whiskey. Oh, also the like thing. Please give me a like, the algorithm, I need to feed the beast. So we're going to start with gin. Obviously, I'm no expert here, but I usually have at least one gin on the shelf, usually 2 or 3. And that's because I have a lot of friends who really enjoy a nice, cold, refreshing G&T in the summer months. I love a good G&T myself, and my fallback, my go-to is a little-known brand called Hendrick's. Yeah, okay, I realize it's a super basic choice, very predictable, and I'm sure there's a lot of gin snobs out there who are shaking their head, but I don't care. I love this stuff. What I like about Hendrick's is the fact that it's meant to be garnished with cucumbers. And I actually prefer cucumbers as a garnish over things like lemons or limes, although I'm not picky really. So I often do have Hendrick's on hand, but of course I do dabble with some other stuff too. Right now on the bar, I've also got a bottle of The Botanist on the go. That's a beautiful gin. It's from the Bruichladdich distillery on Islay. It's wonderful stuff. There's also a gin from my home province in Canada called Ungava Gin. It is the color of your piss after a multivitamin, but it's actually legitimately good and not as weird as you expect it to be. If you're on a tighter budget, I actually quite like the basic Tanqueray gin. If you want to spend a little bit more, Tanqueray number 10 is a fantastic gin. They also have a few sort of like, specialty flavors out there. I haven't tried any of those. Hendrick's does as well. Hendrick's has a bunch of weird releases. I haven't tried any of those. Those could be good. Right now, I've got a bottle of Roku gin on the go as well. That one is on the more affordable side as well. It's Suntory made. It's a Japanese gin. Legitimately nice. I've also tried Divine. I found that one a little bit too soft and rounded for my taste. I'm not a huge fan of Beefeater, the basic Beefeater. Not great stuff. If you want to spend a little bit more for a still very affordable bottle, I would recommend stuff like Bombay Sapphire or the Tanqueray I just mentioned. I guess that's pretty much it for gin. Again, I don't know too much about this category. Feel free to tell me I don't know what I'm talking about. I would love to hear some of your suggestions. If there are some fantastic gins out there that I did not mention that you don't think I know about, please put them down below in the comments. I should explore gin more. All right, so we're going to be moving on to beer here. Beer is the really big one. It's definitely the number 2 behind whiskey. 90% of what I drink is going to be whiskey. Probably the remaining 8% would be beer, and then that final 2% would be other things. So beer as a category is probably what I know the most about. It's what I have the most experience with, and I just love a good beer. However, that's not to say that I've got a very refined beer palate or anything, or that I only drink fine, richly flavored Belgians. In fact, the opposite. My favorite style of beer would be like a crisp, clean lager or pilsner with a bit of body behind it. Much like gin, I tend to drink a lot more beer in the summer, so I'm usually looking for something cold and refreshing and relaxing. I consider beer to be a much more casual drink than whiskey. Whiskey for me is more challenging and more contemplative. Which sounds pretentious. Because it is. Another thing to keep in mind here is that if I recommend this big global international brand, that doesn't mean we're drinking the same beer. So I'll be talking about, this big brand beer that I'm drinking here in Taiwan, that might come from a local Taiwanese brewery, or it might be a Japanese brewery. Meanwhile, if you're drinking the same beer under the same brand in America, it might come from an American brewery. And you're gonna have some flavor drift there, or they might just be completely different beers. So you kind of never know. Anyway, that's enough wasted time. My go-to whiskey here in Taiwan is Suntory Premium Malts. That's a big international brand. You might have access to it in your market. Again, I don't know if it'll come from the same brewery, if it'll taste the same. I really like the flavor here. I think it's bright and clean and refreshing, but also quite characterful. It's really good stuff. And it's the second Suntory product I'm recommending in this video. They should put me on the payroll. For relaxing times, make it Suntory times. Anyway, that's my favorite go-to beer. I believe it does have international distribution. It's affordable, it's delicious, big fan. I'm sure I pissed off a bunch of beer snobs by saying so. That might be the equivalent of a whiskey tuber naming Johnny Walker Red as his whiskey of the year, but I like it. I'm also a pretty big fan of red beers, or Rus beers, whatever you want to call it. Usually when I go back to Canada, I'll have like Sleeman's Red, that's decent stuff. Hobgoblin, anything red really is going to float my boat. Creemore Springs Lager, that's a Canadian one, that one's a good one. Here in Taiwan, we have a brand called Buckskin. I like their Kolsch, I like their Marzen. I also had a really good beer for the first time last week. That one was called Volfas Engelman, Australian IPA. Really good. For Belgians, there's a blonde called Moinette that I really enjoy. It's probably my favorite Belgian, excellent stuff, highly recommended. But honestly guys, I like most beers. Like, there's very few beers that are complete put-offs unless they're really watery. There's a lot of American beer that I don't like. Sorry to my American viewers. That being said, one of the best craft scenes in the world, so I rescind that. No, I mean Bitburger, Erdinger, Boddington's, Stella, Guinness. I'll drink anything and everything as long as it's competently made, as long as it tastes good. I don't care if it's big brand. You'll find no snobbery here. So next up, I want to talk about brandy, and brandy is very often the whiskey drinker's fallback if they're looking for an alternative, and that's because it is a very complex and robust spirit. It's distilled in grapes. It's matured in oak casks or wood casks. At least the good ones are. Personally, I don't buy too much brandy. When I do, it tends to be French. It'll be a French brandy or cognac or armagnac, something along those lines, and that's because the French have a much more stringent set of guidelines than a lot of other countries. But of course, that's not to say that world brandies are of poor quality. I'm sure some are fantastic, but oppositely, some won't not cause blindness. Anyway, my go-to brandy is usually going to be an Armagnac. I tend to prefer Armagnacs over cognacs. I find them to be a little bit more characterful. Armagnacs are distilled once in a column still, as opposed to cognacs that are distilled twice in a pot still. They're also usually less big brand. They're less commercial. It's usually sort of more like a craft house doing them. So you might get a little bit more of an interesting character. At least for me, Armagnacs are the more interesting way to go. Some good basic Armagnacs. I'm a big fan of the Frappin VSOP. Very cheap, affordable, accessible, decent stuff. Jeannot 12, not bad. There was a Castared 8 that blew my mind. That was fantastic stuff. I don't think that one was 40%. In fact, that's the way to go. If you can get stuff over 40%, which is the standard, a lot of Armagnacs, cognacs are very low ABV, which is unfortunate. Go for the higher ABV stuff if you can find it. And what's cool about a lot of this stuff is that it's going to be much more affordable. So you can get stuff that's very well aged or very well presented, and you would expect it to be much more expensive coming from the world of whiskey, and you'll be surprised at how cheap it is for what you're getting. So that's another great thing about exploring brandy. Now, another spirit that's getting a lot of love from whiskey drinkers these days is rum. It didn't used to be quite as popular among whiskey drinkers, but recently, last few years, we've seen a surge of much more interesting, much more complex, robust, premium rums explode onto the market, and it's a really interesting scene, and I think it's going to keep growing. Once again, I should reiterate, do not be fooled if I start sounding like I know what I'm talking about. I do not. But I have enjoyed a few rums over the years. I'm not well versed, but I know what I like. When I was younger, I used to thoroughly enjoy El Dorado 12, and I think if you're on a budget, it's still a very good entry-level rum, some nice complexity for what it is. Diplomatico, I think, is way overhyped. That one is too sweet. They add too much sugar to that one and just wasn't very interesting. Didn't float my boat. Dictador 12 was just okay. Zacapa 23 Solera, while that one also gets a lot of respect, I found it to be a little bit too thick and syrupy. I'm not a fan of those very sort of molassesy, heavy rums. I tend to like the more amber style. But the best rums, and it's not even close, the best rums I've ever had, and probably the best rums you've ever had if you know a little bit about rum, is Foursquare. Foursquare is putting out some amazing craft, cask strength, often single cask, really unique, really interesting rums these days. I mean, these things can rival a fine single malt whiskey. They really are that good. These things can be really complex, really layered, really powerful and punchy, and they're still quite affordable for what they are, much like the brandies. If you're coming in from the world of whiskey, you'll be pretty surprised how far your money goes. When you're buying Foursquare, yes, it is going to be more expensive than the more basic stuff that I just mentioned, but you're definitely going to see where your money's going, so Foursquare is definitely recommended. Alright, so now we're moving into the more miscellaneous category. It can be anything and everything, and this is the stuff that I'm really not that into. And we can start off with stuff like maybe like mezcal, tequila. There are some really interesting premium mezcals, tequilas out there. I'd love to try stuff like Tears of Llorona or Clase Azul. I know they're meant to be fantastic, but the money, that's a lot of money. And I have had samples, not of those ones specifically, but I've tried samples of finer tequilas and they're pretty good. They're really interesting, but I don't know. Just, I guess it's something I'll have to get around to. Out of curiosity, has anyone tried the Rocks tequila? Beyond that, we have stuff like cocktails, which again, not really into. I said I really like a G&T. Beyond G&Ts, I almost never drink cocktails. I think the last non-G&T cocktail I had was probably years ago. If I were to order another cocktail, it would probably be either a Negroni or an old fashioned. They can genuinely be pretty good, but at that point, I'd just rather drink a proper whiskey. I'm not big into vodka. Wine, unfortunately, is a world that's very interesting to me, and I do like a good wine, but I don't know enough about it. I do tend to prefer drier red wines, but I don't know even enough about regions to really go into any detail there. Again, very open suggestions. If there are any tequilas or wines that you think I would enjoy, let me know down below in the comments. I should explore these categories more. One thing I do want to clarify here is that I am looking for more bang for buck suggestions, value-friendly suggestions. So if your suggestion costs like $1,000, by all means, feel free to send me a bottle of the stuff. Probably not going to buy it. So that was it. That's the amateur list of things I tend to drink when I'm not drinking whiskey. It's a short list. I really do focus mostly on whiskey. But I know a lot of you out there have a great deal of passion for other categories, especially things like rum and brandy and tequila and mezcal. I do think they're very interesting worlds. I should branch out more. And with that said, very curious to hear your suggestions. Finally, I know some of you stuck around to find out what my mystery pour is here, and it's terrible. It's terrible. What I'm drinking is probably too small to be made out on camera. This is a sample of Jack Daniel's Tennessee Apple. I don't even think that's going to focus. There we go. Jack Daniel's Tennessee Apple. This was a gift from somebody at a whiskey show a very long time ago. I put off opening it because, obviously. But yeah, since we're talking about alternatives today, and I happened to come across this one on the shelf, and I figured if there's any video that'll give me an excuse to actually pop this stuff, it might as well be this one. So here we are. Figured I'd give you guys a bit of a curveball today. Jack Daniel's Tennessee Apple. It is shit. Unless, of course, the guy who gifted me this sample bottle happens to be watching this video, in which case, thank you. I love it. And on that note, I suppose now is as good of a time as any to wrap things up. So guys, thank you so much for watching. As always, if you want to help support the channel, I do have a Patreon. Otherwise, you can like, comment, and subscribe. Always appreciated. Feel free to give me some suggestions for upcoming videos. And I guess we'll see you next time. Bye-bye.